Welcome to We Question and Learn. This is Tom Pysz, and as of this broadcast, We Question and Learn is celebrating its 18th year on WQLN NPR. We're proud to say we're on 9 other podcast venues and growing, and we bring people of interest, of greater interest, say, to the world at large, if I could use that phrase. Laith Wardi from Executive Pulse. Welcome to the program.
Good to talk to you, Tom.
Executive Pulse is a leading technology, training, and management consulting firm for business retention and expansion programs, and you stretch from across North America. You go from Alaska to the East Coast. Please give us an overview of what Executive Pulse is.
Yeah, so the vast majority of our business comes from selling technology to economic and allied professionals primarily across the U.S. and Canada. We've done work in places like Australia and Europe and Mexico, but our primary focal point is the U.S. and Canada. And, we have clients that are government clients, like the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is a client of ours, but we also work in metro areas, regional, suburban areas, and even localities. But we deploy essentially, customer relationship management systems that allow economic developers to really make sense of their market area and their customers, their private sector businesses. That's what we're in business to do.
You're at this for almost 21 years, is that correct?
It is 20. This year it's 21.
Yeah, yep. Congratulations. I know a little bit more about your business from having talked to you a good number of times on the air here, but could you give us a snapshot how this all came to be 20 years ago?
Yeah, this was really, Tom, at one time I was employed as an economic developer. I was practicing economic development in Erie County, and then we kind of morphed into a regional organization. And we were doing, at the time, this was many years ago, we were doing business retention expansion work, trying to keep and grow the businesses that we have here in Northwest Pennsylvania. We did not have a way of communicating, collaborating with a stakeholder network. That would be, the community colleges, the Ben Franklins, the industrial resource centers, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We regionally did not have a way of making sense of our collective consciousness, if you will, on these, what we knew about these businesses, where they are, where they're going, how we can help them get from point A to point B. So we really created many, many years ago the precursor to the systems that we're selling now. And then we just kind of morphed from a nonprofit entity. We had another entity that was a nonprofit, and we kind of morphed from that to a for-profit. So I no longer practice economic development. I do have my certification, and I do a lot of instruction in the industry for those folks that want to be certified as professional economic developers. But that's really in the rearview mirror for me now. Now I'm really living kind of vicariously through the different clients that we're working with that are doing a lot of interesting things out there in the world.
So you've morphed into satisfying the needs of your customers, basically.
Yeah, and we've been around so long. I don't know if we could kind of catch lightning now if we were trying to start this now, but we were kind of at the right place at the right time, 21 years ago, and we have a fairly large client base, and we continue, even during the pandemic. We've been fortunate. Things have been pretty strong for us, so we're fortunate that way.
Well, if we could move forward then to your current activities, you have a firm or a division called Executive Pulse. And when I saw the webpage on this, I said, you're right on. This is the pulse of business, and that is keeping track of everything. How's that for a simplistic definition of CRM?
Because I'm doing a lot of training, and one of the things I ask people that are in our industry, whether they've been in our industry for 3 days, 3 years, or 30 years, I always say, how are you making sense of the world? So really incumbent upon me, my real job is not doing instruction and training, although I do it for the two major kind of governing or sanctioning bodies in our industry. That would be the International Economic Development Council and the Oklahoma University's Economic Development Institute. And I do a lot of other speaking and training. But really incumbent upon me, Tom, is to really try to understand really global trends and how they impact business, because in economic development, we are really the tail being wagged by the private sector dog. So it's impossible for somebody to do meaningful economic development unless they really understand fundamentally and philosophically where the private sector is, and more importantly, where they're going. So my job, when I put my training and education hat on, is if I want to give people meaningful instruction, part of what I need to be able to do is understand kind of the prevailing forces that are happening right now in the private sector.
Let's go back to my first question, and you answered that eloquently. What I'm trying to relay to the audience is that you can do all this, but if you're not keeping track of it, if you're not exercising measurement techniques, and you're the expert at this, relative to your customer relationship management, it's all for naught. That's my theory.
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, Drucker said if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, and he was absolutely correct. This is all about understanding, if you're a community, where you are today and where you want to go in the future, and this is really adherence to those things. So you're absolutely right. Whether it's job generation or capital investment or how many PhDs your local university is churning out every year, there's a variety of things you can measure in any community.
So as you go into a company, first of all, do they call you, or are you out marketing your product, or are you working on referrals, if I could ask?
Mostly referrals, and keep in mind, it's not necessarily companies that we would be working with. It would be like a regional chamber of commerce or
a big entity,
a state office of economic development, or if we're in Canada, it may be a provincial office of economic development. Those are really the clients that we're working with, and most of our business now is referral business. And a lot of it is coming from the fact that, again, I'm in a normal year, not a COVID year, but a normal year, I spend a lot of time living out of a suitcase. I'm doing a lot of speaking and training gigs, and that provides us with some legs.
Well, you brought up question number 3, and right now the big number is 19, COVID-19, and it has caused great consternation, I guess, to the point where people were more interested in developing their economy than really capturing this thing, grabbing it by the neck and just pillaging it, killing it, so to speak. With that, what has COVID done to your business?
It really a lot of communities now, I'll use British Columbia, the province of British Columbia, as an example.
Mm-hmm.
They have been using our technology to really understand the dynamics of COVID and how it impacts the business community. They are now in their 4th stage of assessment and response work since the beginning of the pandemic. So a lot in Erie County, Tom, interestingly enough, we've done a lot of work in Erie County on a lot of the grant and loan programs that businesses have applied for. We've provided kind of the web portal technology that enables some of the economic development players to really understand what businesses need help and how they can kind of work in that way. So COVID has been, I don't want to minimize or trivialize COVID, but for us, there's been some business opportunities. And because we're a tech firm, it's not like we're running a restaurant here where we had to furlough people. Our staff is basically, many of them were already doing some form of remote work. Now that's just been amped up over the duration of COVID. So it has not impacted us probably the way it has in hospitality or, a lot of other businesses.
As you consult your clients, the municipalities or the governments or the state or British Columbia, do you have a menu that you go in, or are you, again, assessing needs and coming up with solutions?
We're really, a lot of times, like with British Columbia, they already knew how they wanted to frame this discussion with the business community, and this is unfolded logically over, again, 4 stages. So, initially during the pandemic, it was really kind of crisis management, and it was how is this impacting you in terms of employment and sales and, all those types of things, supply chain, et cetera. And this has followed a natural path. But most of the clients that we're working with COVID, in terms of COVID assessment and response, we're helping them a little bit. But I think most of them already have pretty viable strategies in place. And we're simply wrapping our technology around the way that they're trying to get a grip on their own private sector business.
So what I'm hearing is that even though you're going in and talking about COVID, you're staying within your template, your business model, so that when this passes on, you've installed a system.
Yeah, and a lot of this is, Tom. You're not in the industry, but really there are three. When you're looking at economic development, it doesn't matter if we're talking about economic development in Brazil or the United States or Indiana or California. There are really three basic ways to instigate the economy. You work with the businesses of tomorrow. We call that small business or entrepreneurial development, okay? That's one way to instigate the economy. The other way to instigate the economy is you try to lure businesses from the outside in. Essentially, that's business recruitment. And the final way is work with the businesses that you already have. COVID and this whole idea of disasters in a larger context really aligns itself with working with the businesses that you already have. Those communities, those regions and states and provinces that we have the opportunity to work with, that we're already doing meaningful interactions with their local business community. COVID was, I don't want to say it was just a blip on the radar screen, but it was manageable because they already had mechanisms in place that allowed them to, through continuous dialogue, back and forth, they understood. They had relationships with the business community. It gave them mechanisms to understand the trials and tribulations and respond to the business community. Those folks that have not been doing this type of work in a meaningful way, in other words, keeping local businesses on your radar screen, understanding where they are and servicing them, and making sure that their needs are met through customer service. Those folks were caught flat-footed during the pandemic. So, this has really been a kind of a tale of two cities. Those people that already structurally had a communication channel and relationships with the businesses in their backyard, in my mind, based on what I've been able to see, it doesn't matter where they're located, the size of the community, urban, rural, et cetera, they've been able to really withstand this pandemic. Not to say they went unscathed, but they made it through the gauntlet. Those folks that didn't have those mechanisms in place, that didn't have, these programs in place that provided for this type of feedback with the private sector, again, they were caught flat-footed. So and I think the lesson learned for those folks is this should be an epiphany that says the next time something like this happens, we're not going to be caught flat-footed.
Well, it wasn't that long ago. I think 2016 or so, Bill Gates did his little 15-minute TED Talk predicting this whole mess. Boy, I listened to that a dozen times subsequent, and he was right on. Also later on, and I think you talked about it with me on a prior program, this is now potentially a norm. It's a sine wave that's going to keep blipping as we move forward into the future, and that governments and society and, of course, business needs to be prepped up for this a little better than it was.
Yeah, and I would just say, COVID is the uber disaster. Okay, COVID is in our lifetime. This is real. We can't think of anything that approached this. When you compare this to, you look at a 9/11, we lost, and I'm not trying to minimize this. We lost 4,000 people, and this country has observed that day. Now think about the impact of COVID on this country in terms of the human casualties and the human despair. But I think the lesson is it doesn't matter if it's cyber related, if it's a natural disaster, if it's a COVID, a pandemic. We businesses and communities need to be prepared for these disruptions because increasingly that's what we're seeing in our world. And obviously, I don't need to talk. You and I have talked about climate before.
Yes.
Much of what we're seeing with COVID, in my mind, is a dress rehearsal for the fallout we're going to see from a climate standpoint. COVID is going to be a blip on the radar screen based on what we're seeing in the crystal ball on climate.
It's actually scary because some of the physical effects of that are happening today. Coastal waterways, building new mitigation around New York, Florida. I don't think we're really ready for this to some degree.
No, and we're not ready for it. When you look at the Syrian refugees from the Assad regime and the disruption they caused throughout Europe, And I mean, that's a thing of the past. If you look at Germany, for example, they've been able to assimilate, much to the chagrin of the folks there that were saying this is going to be a major disruption for us long term. Those Syrian refugees have assimilated very nicely into Germany as an example, and they took the lion's share of those refugees. But the bottom line is, that foray of refugees, that was a disruption. And we're going to see climate refugees that are going to be coming from parts of the world where they are at sea level or close to sea level. As the seas rise, we're going to find more and more places that are just simply not able to support people. And they're going to be moving around. So this is giving us a glimpse into where we're going.
Look at the United States. You're up to British Vancouver all the time. I'm sure you've traveled through Seattle. Can you imagine the disruption of a major port as Seattle? And many things come from China through Seattle, including a lot of people. This has got to be something that they're looking into now, would you say? Are they scared?
I was at a food festival in Miami with my wife and a couple of our friends from Ohio. I want to say 7 years ago, and we were on South Beach, and we were experiencing a midday flooding. So I mean, this, it doesn't matter if it's Miami, as you said, New York City, Seattle. When you look at the United States, there are a lot of coastal areas that are going to be susceptible to this. Certainly.
I was not laughing, but it made me think deeply that when you look at the history of New York City, there's tunnels that nobody knows about, that probably half that city is underground. Fortunately, it sits high enough right now.
Yep.
Do you consult folks on this topic, a point of contention with clients?
All we're telling them is they need to look at something like daycare, for example. Daycare has not really been thought of necessarily as an economic development element in a community. But now I would say daycare, post-COVID, if we're paying attention as a community, I don't care where you are, Boston or Erie or wherever you might be, as a community, you need to think, hey, if we need to deploy workforce, those folks, in the event of any sort of disruption, they're going to need a place to put their children. Daycare becomes that focal point. Healthcare becomes a focal point. And I know in a general context, we always think of healthcare as maybe being an economic development element in a community, but it's also always been kind of a muted one. COVID has really taught us that our definition of what constitutes economic development really needs to be broadened out. That would be the lessons learned for me.
Now that you mentioned daycare, that scares me a little bit. I don't feel, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because you're out in the real world all the time, that our daycare system is fragmented. It's home care, it's amateur care. Sorry to say that to some folks because they're well-meaning. There's no homogeneous structure to that.
That is correct.
And I look at cities
I don't want to get political.
No, we're not getting political, but it's not there.
When Biden is talking about the infrastructure plan and people say, well, daycare is not infrastructure. Well, it is if you're in a community where 50% of your workforce are females and they've disproportionately been asked to put down their widget maker and sit home with children, then it becomes an economic development issue and it becomes an infrastructure issue. So I would ask people that look at these things at a cursory level, like broadband's is an infrastructure, or daycare is not infrastructure. Peel the onion a little bit. Think about things flip the focus and look at things a little differently. And I think you're going to see that there's a validity in a lot of what this current administration, the trial balloons that they are floating right now. There are a lot of rationale in what they're trying to do.
Measuring what's happened to the country, say, over the last 10 years, you're saying that it's changing direction for the good?
I'm saying right now things have never been more in flux than they are today.
In flux, okay. Yeah.
If I'm a private sector business, let's go back to, again, I'm going to try to be as apolitical as I can be today. It doesn't matter if I'm at the tail end of Bush 43 or the formative stages of the Obama administration. Yes. The last recession that we saw in this country, pre-COVID, not the COVID-induced recession, but the one before, when Obama went out and said, hey, and Bush also, they both came out and said, we have to instigate the economy. Even back then, pre-COVID, businesses were never experiencing so much disruption. Their businesses are being forced to adopt technologies at a record-breaking rate. Businesses are saying, hey, it's no longer supply chain local, customers local, vendors local, whatever it might be. Now they're saying everything is global. So it's the assimilation of technology at a breakneck pace. It's globalization. It's rationalization of supply chain. Businesses, it's trying to find talent. Even pre-COVID, businesses are really trying to understand how they fit into this kind of really fast environment. And then you throw COVID into the mix. And when you look at the business closures, it's no wonder so many businesses folded up their tents, because it's unprecedented what we are looking at right now.
I was listening to Bloomberg yesterday, and they were talking about a young entrepreneur, sort of taxi cab driver to billionaire in the United States over a period of less than 5 years. And then recently, they just asked him to leave the country. Are we blind to bringing in incredible talent to help us with this great need in the United States?
That is one of my pet peeves. We essentially, again, go back to 9/11, and I think collectively in this country we kind of had an epiphany where we said, look, keeping our borders open, even for, and I'm not talking illegal, I'm talking legal immigration. We were saying this is scary. These people could be terrorists. Well, yeah, they could be, but when you look at the composition of the largest tech firms in the United States, those companies that really make the United States today what it is, no offense to General Motors, but they are not emblematic of what this country is all about. Apple is emblematic of this country. Facebook is emblematic of this country. Those are the businesses that today, globally, they're our brand. When you look at who those CEOs are, whether it's Google or Alphabet, whether it's Apple, going back to Steve Jobs, these are first or second generation immigrants. We have been really good at attracting the right people to this country and allowing them to do their thing. That spigot was closed during the last administration, and you can't just flip the switch, Tom. Once you tell the world that we're closed for business and we don't want you here on a student visa, it's difficult to then reinstigate those folks. But the problem with that is you had Canada that was more than willing, and they've been much better than we have historically with immigrant workforce. They were more than happy to glom onto those cast-offs that we didn't want. And the UK was also more than happy to be aggressive in pulling those folks in. And then you look at where these multinationals are coming from, people from India or China that said, you know what, if I'm not going to go to the U.S. to go to college or university, I'm going to go here in China and I'm going to start my dreams here. So we have lost a lot of ground, in my mind, in terms of innovation because of what you just described.
And look where one of the leading entrepreneurs in the world, look where he lives and what he's doing. It fascinates me. Well, when they closed the border, so to speak, we don't want Chinese goods. And all of a sudden, American farmers were suffering because they couldn't get product that made their product as they grew it competitive in the United States. It's strange.
Kind of the law of unintended consequences in many cases.
So as you're moving along, consulting these municipalities and organizations, we touched on climate. Are these political groups, these community leaders, are they aware of what's coming?
I don't think they are, but I'm going to tell you from an economic rationalization perspective, I would tend to agree with those people that say climate change, yes, it can be potentially devastating. We're probably beyond the tipping point in some respects, but it can also provide us with a lot of opportunity. When you look at those businesses, Tom, that are green in nature, green jobs, in other words, when we say, hey, what's the rationale? My community, hey, we're all about petroleum, or my community's in more traditional, carbon-burning industries. What would be my incentive to go green? Well, aside from helping the climate, even if you don't buy into that narrative, I want to tell you, green jobs pay much more than normal jobs. Green jobs tend to be in what we call industrial clusters, which means they are in in industrial ecosystems that are self-perpetuating. Those jobs tend to be export jobs. In other words, the bringing fresh dollars into your economy for goods or services that you're selling outside your economy. So green, on top of everything else, the barriers to entry for a plumber that says, you know what, I'm now working in green energy, he or she does not have to change what they know or what they do to assimilate those jobs. They're going to get more pay. Those jobs are going to be in much more stable industries typically, and you're going to see fresh dollars coming into your community for the goods or services that green company is selling. So there's an economic justification. Forget it. You could say, I'm not a tree hugger, I don't believe any of this stuff. That's fine. From an economic standpoint, it makes sense to go green.
Gotcha. Because there's markets, there's technology that makes that kind of thing happen.
And those jobs do not require, I'm not saying that there aren't PhDs in many of those jobs, but there's a lot of rank and file union type jobs where you can simply slide into these much better paying occupations simply by saying we're going to go green. And again, when you think about Silicon Valley and the revolution in Silicon Valley and what we're seeing now with the Apples and the Googles and all those businesses, climate has the opportunity to give us that impetus. If we can solve these problems, we're going to encounter technologies and new ways of doing things and new commerce channels that we haven't even thought about yet. So there's a lot of opportunity here. We just have to be willing to flip the page. And I would say to you, Tom, I'm going to give you two examples. I said General Motors isn't the old, like Alfred Sloan General Motors anymore. They're not the way they were in the heyday in the 50s and 60s when they were the 800-pound gorilla globally. But I will tell you that GM, everything you need to know about their position on where things are going is you look at the Hummer. And that is the quintessential, hey, we're going from the Hummer as the poster child for being a gas guzzler to the Hummer being one of the most expensive and high performance and tricked out electric vehicles. And then you go down the street in Detroit and you knock on the door of the folks at Ford, and they're taking the F-150, the number one selling pickup truck, and I would probably say one of the top three selling vehicles, period, in the United States, and they're electrifying that vehicle. General Motors and Ford are already telling you everything you need to know about where the markets are going. You don't need Mitch McConnell and Joe Biden to sign off on this and pray over it. This stuff's happening. With or without them, these markets are moving. This is a revolution. It's happening now. And what communities need to ask themselves, are we going to be riding this wave or missing this wave? Yes. That's where you are right now.
And when you mentioned Ford and GM, I call it the electrification of General Motors, and you are absolutely right. Well, even the new electric Mustang, it almost flipped me over. Yeah, right. Elon Musk has got to be quivering a little bit, or he's very happy that he started a new movement in the world, whatever the case may be.
He started a new movement. I don't know obviously that when you look at the capitalization rates and the shareholder return for Tesla, it's unbelievable. And what he's doing with SpaceX is unbelievable. But I would say that, when Ford is going to be in the next year and a half producing the F-150s for $38,000, and they have a range of 280 miles, and they have unprecedented performance, and they're going to be very affordable, I think that's going to pose a challenge to his business model. He's going to have to make some course
all you need to do is put a little, actually a refrigerator, half a refrigerator size device in your garage, and you're off and running, so to speak. Yeah, forgive the pun there. You also look into the future. You created another segment of your business. It's on your website as bre.guru. I love people who buy the new suffixes and use them to their marketing advantage. Could you tell us about how that started and what's the objective to that?
That's really just a kind of a general blueprint for those communities that are interested in setting up programs that enable them to have active dialogue with the private sector. And it just gives them some bullet points to think about that's a site that's quite frankly, I mean, we're not looking at that site to do anything other than disseminate information.
Okay.
And that really kind of, Tom, takes some of the essence of what I talk to people about in economic development or workforce development or, technology assimilation. We're really kind of synthesizing everything on that website. It's just meant to be kind of a bulletin board of some of the other ideas that we have. One of the things I'm not good at, Tom, at all, I'm not good at social media and that whole thing. I just don't get it. For me, it's not.
Join the club.
I mean, I do get it. I know why people do it, but for me, I still kind of believe in more old school. We talked about, like I mentioned, Drucker. I'm still kind of adhering to the kind of the old school sales masters and marketing masters. I don't, and I know there's a lot of justification for why you should be on Facebook and spending a lot of time on LinkedIn and all that, but I really don't do that stuff very
Well, look
often.
where we're sitting. We're on WQLN radio, and of course we supplement it by all the podcasts on all the major venues, but there's still this intimacy of turning that device on in your car without having to worry about Wi-Fi or your cell phone going dead and disseminating information. You and I agree it's a very valuable media. If we could go back to what you were talking about as you were discussing how this technology is going to propagate itself, you dropped me a note about artificial intelligence, and everyone that I've talked to said, take your money and put it there one way or the other. What are your thoughts? This is a whole new industry.
Yeah, computers don't think and may never really think like the human brain thinks. But in a lot of ways, when you look, for example, at the virus, the response to the pandemic, the deployment of drugs is only made possible by the algorithms and the smarts of artificial intelligence. So a lot of those type of tasks, artificial intelligence does better than the human brain. A lot, when you look at, for example, the chess masters now getting beaten 9 out of 10 times, computers are beating them. That's the kind of things that artificial intelligence, in terms of modeling and being able to go through, if you will, quote unquote, big data very quickly to see trends. And you look at like what's happening in China with facial recognition, and I know there's pros and cons with that, but all that type of stuff, if you will, is all part and parcel of AI. And there is going to be a point when we start to really see, they're talking about a tipping point, and that time horizon keeps getting expanded. But there will be a point when machine learning and machines really significantly outpace the collective consciousness of all of us in the human brain. They're going to be able to chug through a lot more data than we can and make sense of it, find patterns and find trends. And again, I mean, if you're in the pharmaceutical industry, you're all about AI. If you're, more than a passing interest in the healthcare industry, because AI is better at detecting colon cancer and potential heart problems and Alzheimer's. And I mean, so there is a role for AI, but everything we're doing these days, we talked about Tesla as an example. There are many more microprocessors in your car than there were in the initial moonshots. So, I mean, today, everything, whether it's your refrigerator, whether it's your Alexa or your Google device, everything has brains now to a certain extent. And things are going to, and, when you look at manufacturing, modern manufacturing, or when you look at modern logistics, and this whole idea of autonomous vehicles, this is going to be, again, we can either jump on these waves as a community, or we can be kind of left on the beach saying we didn't ride the wave when it was there. There's a lot of options right now for communities that want to get into this.
Ironically, I believe I've heard that there's a chip shortage, and that is affecting car manufacturing. Who would have thought 10 years ago that would be a problem?
Well, you mentioned Bill Gates. Bill Gates did think 10 years ago that was going to be a problem, actually. And some other folks were saying, hey, it's great that you can rationalize supply chain to the Pacific Rim and get things a lot cheaper, but we are losing our autonomy. And, Tom, it's not just about consumer goods. our military runs on this type of technology. So it's not just about cars that you can't find enough microprocessors for, because they govern everything from how your transmission shifts from first to second gear, how your air conditioning works, et cetera, in your automobile. But it's also all of our military infrastructure is ultimately governed by this type of technology as well. So I think one of the epiphanies from COVID for, I think everybody, nobody's arguing that we don't need to bring supply chain back to the United States. That is a given. I think it doesn't matter if you're an R, if you're a D, if you're in between. Everybody agrees that we were caught flat-footed nationally, and that needs to be a change.
We're having a discussion with Laith Wardi of Executive Pulse, Inc. And as we continue this discussion, the way I see it, you're directly involved with government leadership. I do know that you communicate with these leaders directly. Are they optimistic? Are they pessimistic? As you talk, observe, and report on these folks, what are your thoughts? Does that affect how you feel where we're going?
Yeah, I think that what's on, generally when I'm talking to people that would be decision makers, generally the things on their radar screen are, like we talked about, green and sustainability. That's on their radar screen.
Okay, good.
Increasingly, Tom, we didn't talk about this, but increasingly this whole idea of corporate activism, shareholder activism, employee activism, and that ties into equity issues. Those are two other variables that are on everybody's radar screen. We did talk about technology. I would also say workforce and talent is one of the other main workforce issues existed pre-pandemic. They have only been amped up since the pandemic. We are experiencing right now unprecedented workforce shortages, and there's a variety of reasons for that, but that's on everybody's radar screen. And one of the other things that's on everybody's radar screen, and nobody wants to talk about it because families are fighting over it and everything else, is this whole idea of political tribalism, and that's on everybody's radar screen.
Yeah. Well, define that. Go into that, please. Are you talking geographically or types of people?
I think it's geographically and types of people, both. And I think it's the polarization of. And really in our country, and it's not just unique to our country, we do a lot of work in Canada, and a lot of our Canadian friends are telling us that they are seeing a lot of the same type of sentiments in Canada, the polarization between conservative and liberal or vice versa. I mean, so it's not just a matter anymore of me saying, I didn't agree with Reagan's foreign policy as it related to India or China. Yeah. Now it's demonizing that party completely, and this is, I guess, where the lines blur for me a little bit. But when you look at social media, really, just because everybody has a megaphone doesn't mean everybody's voice is valid. Right. You have a lot of folks out there really perpetuating and promulgating a lot of quote-unquote information that has no basis in fact. And we're seeing, in this country, I think we're seeing real challenges to our political kind of way of life, what we've experienced for 200 plus years. I don't think there's any guarantees of the way that the way forward. It's pretty scary right now, and a lot of businesses are telling us that. A lot of business people and decision makers are telling us that as well.
So what's the next big thing? Is it AI? Is it AI with robotics? Or is there something on the other side of that?
AI is going to continue to be a big deal. And we talked about climate change. Tom, all this stuff mashes up, if that makes sense to you.
It does.
We talk about climate change. Well, the only remedy, the only hope for mankind is that we, through AI, figure out some path forward to mitigate the carbon in the atmosphere. This is really where – so all this stuff kind of mashes up. But, yeah, technology is going to be a huge deal. But, when you look at what's been happening with the hacks right now, that's the downside of our reliance on the Internet as kind of the bedrock of everything that we do.
That crosses your desk, right? These folks ask you about that?
Well, they're not necessarily asking us about it, but they're telling us that they feel that they are susceptible.
Oh, okay.
And, governments are squarely in the crosshairs of these type of intrusions. And anything that can be built this way using technology can be broken this way, or you can break in using technology. So there are really no safe havens. But you look at supply chain disruption, whether it's petroleum or now it's food this week. Next it was electricity. This is going to be a new normal for us, these type of events. So again, my counsel to any community would be you have to plan for these types of things. This is going to happen much more frequently than it ever has in the past.
I'm afraid
because you don't have to be a state-sponsored actor to do this. You can literally be a job shop somewhere in the Pacific Rim or in India or in the United States.
Yes.
3 or 4 hackers can really disrupt things.
Do you teach preparation, or is it just you're saying be prepared under advisement?
We're doing resiliency work, but I actually use some specialists from, believe it or not, British Columbia that have done work all over the globe in terms of resiliency, and I use them whenever I'm doing these type of sessions. I always bring them into the mix because they know this far better than I do. This needs to be baked into any private sector or government equation, this whole idea of resiliency. It needs to be part and parcel of how you're looking at things moving forward.
So not only are you managing data information and helping people design infrastructure, have you written anything on this? Seems to me you probably should have about 10,000 pages in your office basement ready to go to press.
I've done a couple things, but it's, again, there's a lot of things I'm not good at, and that is something I don't have the discipline to do.
Yeah.
I'm good at, I guess I'm good at speaking about these things sometimes, but I don't memorialize what I've been talking about. And I would also say, Tom, the speed of commerce today and the speed of the velocity of change, you write something today and tomorrow it's out.
It's useless.
It's essentially outmoded.
Yeah.
It's just things are moving so quickly right now. It's unbelievable. And I feel like we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the whole talent exodus and the talent migration that's happening. Emblematically in the United States, you can see people are leaving metro areas, leading metros, and they're kind of homecoming back to smaller areas. But I mean, the pendulum's never going to swing back. COVID has been so disruptive this way, and I'm a block away from Erie Insurance's new
mega
headquarters
building,
office here.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see a lot of people going to Subway. I'm down here every day. I don't see a lot of people walking around. And I mean, obviously you hear from the mayor of New York City, and they're saying, hey, our downtown in Manhattan has not recovered. And you talk to restaurant owners that say we can't make a living by 20% of our normal lunch hour trade. And I mean, this is really going to rewire the economy in so many different ways.
And I heard stories of 20% of Midtown Manhattan. They have their homes there, but they have homes elsewhere, and they've exited to the suburbs and the hills, or beyond the suburbs.
Exactly, because once you open up the floodgates and said to your employees, you don't have to work from the office, they started working from home, and they're like, wait a minute, I'm in San Jose. Why am I paying San Jose rent when I could move to Idaho, get a better quality of life, and be living in some rural community where I'm making San Jose wages, I'm making Silicon Valley wages, but I'm living in a much more cost-effective market. This is when I talk to you about missing the wave. There are communities that were positioned perfectly for this. Those communities that already invested in broadband and made sure that in every nook and cranny of their community, every person and every business had access to affordable internet, they were positioned for this talent movement. Those folks that were doing talent recruitment, and I know Tulsa recently has had some very negative press due to the whole Black Wall Street situation and what happened there 100 years ago. But the positive attribute of Tulsa is the fact that they were doing, a decade ago, they started doing Come to Tulsa. We will incentivize you to come to Tulsa. And we want smart people coming to Tulsa. You can work from anywhere, be a remote worker, but live here. those communities like Chattanooga that was doing broadband a decade ago, and they continue to have a focus on having a wired community, a gigabyte community, and people like Tulsa that were doing talent attraction, they caught this wave. Most communities missed this COVID wave. You had talent that was moving at an unprecedented rate, and the mass of talent that moved, the out-migration of talent.
Yeah.
And then the question is, who benefited from this? Well, those people that were positioned correctly did.
We are a society that has moved their families all over sons, daughters, nephews, nieces. People have moved out of their home, and I'm looking at the 70s and the 80s. No problem moving to California from New York City or moving from Erie, Pennsylvania to Florida. So we have families that are scattered all over the world. Do you see a reuniting of the family structure subsequently? Are people moving home?
I haven't thought about that. I think that would be, I guess I've thought about it in passing, but I haven't seen any corroborating data.
Okay.
But it seems to me that given the opportunity, that would be a selling attribute for those communities that have, hey, we've got an embedded group of seniors here, and we want to try to get their children here. That would be a great, hey, spend time with your grandparents. Your kids can see your grandparents. I mean, that's a marketing angle to me as a community. So I think that's interesting.
So when
definitely
you go back to the era of the Erie Canal causing New York City, Buffalo, New York, and points beyond, eventually Chicago, the Great Lakes, the new canal is the fiber optic line, the fat pipe that allows people to do business anywhere. You still travel a lot, and I guess that's because your clients, and as best as you could travel, if you did at all with COVID, you still travel a lot. The big thing that I'm hearing is rebuilding the infrastructure, the roads, the rail. As you travel, do you hear that from people and businesses, particularly municipalities who they may absorb a huge bill trying to do something over?
When you talk to people that have been abroad recently, specifically people that have been to metro areas in China, or have been to Japan, or have been to more progressive communities in Europe, they're going to tell you that, a lot of people have been saying, hey, some of our airports are like a third world country. That's not such a stretch.
No.
And, it's not coincidental, Tom. You and I are an hour and a half, 2 hours from Pittsburgh, where we're sitting right now.
Yes.
It's not coincidental that every politician, when they're talking about infrastructure, goes to Pittsburgh, because Pittsburgh has so many bridges that are ready to implode.
Yes.
If you're trying to make a point on infrastructure reform, that would certainly make sense to me, to use Pittsburgh kind of as a poster child for that. So I mean, as a point of clarification, I have literally not been on an airplane in 14 months. I'm going to start traveling again now.
Okay.
I've been doing a lot of webinar stuff, which has been fine, but I mean, now people are starting to get back to quote unquote normal. So I'm going to be traveling again, but I have seen every nook and cranny of this country and many parts of Canada. And I'm familiar with what's out there. So, yeah, definitely.
We're talking with Laith Wardi. He is you mark yourself as an owner. Person at large is my title for you of Executive Pulse. We always ask our guests, as you sit there with your computer in front of you, and you look at all the data that you've accumulated. Let's just pretend you're looking at everything you've learned, so to speak, in the last couple of years, last year particularly, the 14 months you've been isolated. Where do you see all this going in the next couple of years? What AI is the trend? Is that it, or is there something else that we should be aware of?
I think, again, on your radar screen, I don't care who you are, what lens you're looking through, on your radar screen, you have to be talking about green and this whole idea of climate. This is a force. Whether you want to see it or not, it's something that exists, and we're going to be dealing with this. This whole concept of corporate activism, and think about the face, no pun intended, of the decision maker at leading companies these days, the business, the CEO community is younger. Many of them are people of color. These are people that did not come from this country in many instances. They have a different way of looking at things than their predecessors did. They're looking at things in a much different way. So you're looking at consumers who are demanding that, hey, there's equity and there's fairness, shareholders that are demanding that, and even workers within an organization are saying, hey, Amazon, we expect you to behave a certain way. You have to be a good corporate citizen. So that whole idea of activism is going to be happening more and more. The political tribalism that I mentioned to you, that is definitely a force. I saw something last night that scared the crap out of me. QAnon, they were talking about QAnon membership in the United States now surpasses the people that are buying into that movement, surpass most of the major religious sects in this country combined. So it's Protestants, Methodists, et cetera, et cetera. Think about that. You have 25% of people that are believing something that is, quite frankly, without any sort of validity. It's made. I don't know if you saw the HBO documentary on that, but I mean, this is really just kind of like fantasy land, and we have people that are believing it. So that's going to be something coming up. This whole idea of where people live, and Tom, it's about, in 2 decades ago it would be, hey, businesses are following, where can they get cheap land and where can they get cheap employment? And now it's like, hey, businesses are following high-end talent. So you look at a Dallas-Fort Worth, or you look at an Austin, Texas, where you have a migration of young, skilled, agile, adaptive workers. Businesses are going to go to those places, or at least tap those markets. So talent's going to be a big deal. And obviously we talked about AI. Technology is also, and we can't even envision what that. I mean, if you asked right now, if you asked Tim Cook at Apple and said, hey, tell us, where your company's going to be in 3 years, he would have no idea. They
can't tell.
Things are moving so quickly. It's just it's crazy. So that would be the other thing that I would say to keep your eye. A lot of these things are still kind of happening right now, and they're going to continue to happen. We're going to have to sit on the sidelines and see how things work out.
Laith Wardi, President, Executive Pulse, Inc. If someone wanted to drop you a line to comment on the interview, or maybe just to ask you a question, or maybe even engage in a touch of debate, hopefully professional about it, what's a good way to find you?
They could go to our executivepulse.com site and just
send a note.
Links there. They can just email.
That's fine. As usual, another hour of what I find to be great insight and education. Thank you very much. Thank you for participating in this public media program. Laith Wardi, thank you very much.
I'm Michelle Martin. These days it seems like just about everybody is choosing sides and doubling down on talking points. Here at NPR, we try to cut through the noise with meaningful and respectful discussions with people from all perspectives, backgrounds, and walks of life. Join the conversation every weekend on All Things Considered from NPR News.
Saturday and Sunday afternoons at 5 on WQLN Radio.
Welcome to We Question and Learn, a short special program today with Adam Bratton. And Adam's the executive director of the nonprofit partnership here in Erie, Pennsylvania. And today's short topic, Adam, will be on Erie Gives Day, which is coming up when?
Erie Gives Day is August 10th. So it's 12 hours that day, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. on August 10th.
How did this start? How did this begin? It's been quite a few years already.
Yeah, it started in 2011 and was, I think just kind of the Erie Community Foundation wanted to test a giving day. They have become or had become popular, around the country and communities around the country, and wanted to test it here in Erie. With the first test run, they raised about $775,000 from almost 2,800 donors, and thought that was great, and just continued it every year since then. And it's been fantastic. It's grown incredibly to where last year it raised almost $6.4 million from about 11,500 donors.
And that was during the COVID era.
That was smack dab in the middle of
Yeah.
the pandemic.
Yeah.
We just saw incredible generosity from the Erie community stepping up during that time. Raised almost about 800,000 more than the previous year, and certainly surprised the number of us, because August of last year, nobody really knew what the economy was going to be or do. We couldn't foresee anything, and the fact that the Erie community stepped up, broke all previous records, and almost added 3,000 donors from the previous year was incredible.
Let's backtrack. The event is August 10th?
Yep, August 10th from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m.
And the beneficiaries of this great fundraiser will be?
The beneficiaries will be any nonprofit that is registered to participate in Erie Gives. And if people want more information about the eligible nonprofits, they can go to eriegives.org. And there is a search function for the nonprofits that are registered. But most of the nonprofits in the Erie community register for this giving day. So
great.
If somebody has an organization that they regularly support and that is at the top of their charity list, chances are they are registered in the Erie Gives program and can easily make a donation on that day to that nonprofit.
And the fastest way to connect is eriegives.org.
Yep, eriegives.org. So, it's primarily an online day of fundraising. There are other ways to give. Over the last few years, people have been able to drop off checks that can be designated to their nonprofits for that day. Mm-hmm. They can make other contributions in advance that will be counted on that day. And all those means of giving can be found on the eriegives.org website. But most of the contributions do come in online during that 12-hour period on August 10th.
Okay. In this last half minute, Adam Bratton, Executive Director of the Nonprofit Partnership, we want to thank you for this brief interlude here, so to speak, to make people aware of a very important day. And certainly Erie Gives Day is affiliated with the Nonprofit Partnership and, of course, the Erie Community Foundation.
It's become Erie Gives Day has become a real source of giving for nonprofits. They plan for it, they rely on it, they put a lot of effort into getting donors to participate on that day. There is a prorated match every year, and this year it's about $400,000. So that amount will be divvied up, again, prorated amongst the nonprofits, depending on how much they raise and that sort of thing. But it's a way for donors just to add a little something extra to their gift, and it's a way for nonprofits to raise money at a time in August, where giving generally slows down. So it's a win for the nonprofits. It's a win for the donors who can maximize their gifts, and just a terrific day of giving that we hope more and more people will participate in.
Well, Adam Bratton, Executive Director of the Nonprofit Partnership, thank you for jumping on real quick here and updating us on this important day coming up August 10th. And, of course, they can find all your information. They can just go to eriegives.org. They'll find all the data. And thank you very much for visiting. We question and learn.
Thank you, Tom, for all you do and for having me on. And looking forward to hearing from everybody on that day.
Thank you.